Works from the faculty of the Whitlow R. Green College of Education. This is the second in our series, and we are happy to welcome this afternoon Dr. Pamela Barber-Freeman, Dr. Anthony Harris, Dr. Katina Thomas, and Dr. Donald Collins, who will share with us their recent works and publications. We would like to thank the KPVU TV studio and Professor and Director Teresa Dowell-Vest for inviting us to be in their studio today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Foster, for this opportunity, and thanks to the Center for Teaching of Excellence for inviting me to share my book, Safe Spaces. Unlike my colleagues, my book is written not only for learning purposes, but spiritual learning and spiritual growth. I started this book about 15 years ago or longer, and it sat on my computer until right before COVID. And I said, I need to finish the book. And I started to finish, then I put it on hold again. And during COVID, I just kept hearing this voice say, finish the book. So I finished this book, and it's taken a year with my publisher to finally get it published. In fact, the press release and the web page that they designed were just developed last month. So you're seeing something right off the press. But one of the reasons I developed this book, and I didn't even have a title. I just had the chapters and some of the stories. Each chapter is an acronym of grace, faith, peace, hope, love, joy, and pray. I realized the reason I didn't finish it 15 years ago is because there were challenges that my life endured. And I had to wait until the perfect time, because his time is always perfect. 10 years ago, I lost a sister. The sister that was closest to me. She was a principal in Illinois. We were the closest in age. She really actually helped to raise me. And within a week, I lost another sister, and we had a double funeral. I'm a licensed minister, so my family decided I would be the one to officiate. Now, if I tell you that was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, I didn't think I could do it. It was midnight the day before. I'm laying in the bed crying, saying, Lord, take this from me. I cannot do this. But then I finally just gave in and said, if this is what you want me to do, then you're going to have to speak through me. And it was like an out-of-body experience, me up there officiating a double funeral for two sisters. And one of my sisters, the second one, Billy, that passed, she was an ordained minister. I'm what they call a divorced woman, and I say divorced because it's like a death. You have to go through the same stages of healing when you are divorced from someone, because you've been that, instead of two people, you've been one person for a number of years. Right. So I had to go through a lot of things. I had to go through some administrators that I won't say, that took us through some changes here in PV. And Dr. Collins, you can attest to that, that we went through some changes. And I realized that I had to go through all of that, but going through that and not being an addict of some kind, not being in a mental institution, being able to sit here today and converse is because God showed me how to find some safe spaces in my life. And that's what I'm sharing with you today. You know, if we're not going in a storm, we're in a storm, or we're coming out of a storm. And how do you stay safe while you're going in, enduring, and coming out? How do you say goodbye to loved ones? How do you go through challenging situations on your job? What I've done in safe spaces is identified or told some of my own personal stories along with some biblical stories that help to get me through with hope, finding my joy, being able to still love after being hurt by those you love, just how to pray and ask for guidance. So when I say it's not quite like my colleagues, mine is from a spiritual aspect. And one of the unique things that was given to me that I really like about this book is when I'm reading books on Christianity or spiritual growth or learning, they list scriptures, and so then I have to stop, look up the scripture in the Bible, then try to come back. I didn't want that for my readers. One of the things I have done that's a little unique is I have written out the entire scripture that is associated with each chapter, followed by prayers that I've written, and then followed by space where you can write your own prayers or your own thoughts about love, hope, peace, pray, grace, and so forth. Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Amen.
Dr. Freeman. I love your title.
Thank
Safe
you.
Spaces.
Safe
I really love
Spaces.
that.
Yes.
I met your sister when you brought her to campus.
Sweet, yeah, my principal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember her. She was so sweet. And I really look forward to, I haven't read your book, but I know about it, and I look forward to reading it. I also look forward to giving it as Christmas gifts to some aunts that I think would really benefit. Safe Spaces, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I kind of announced it before my publishers, and people have already started buying it. And one lady from my church said, I've already bought 2. I gave the first one away because I knew who needed this. And so it's not just for women, it's for men, it's
Right.
for youth, because I tell them some of the trials I went through in college, all those many years ago. Some of the challenges I faced trying to be a right on sister
wonderful.
with the Army fatigues and the combat boots
Afro.
and the big afro.
All right.
So some of the challenges I faced in college. So it's really for all ages.
Okay.
Thank you, Don, for sharing that.
Well, and I like the journal aspect of it as well. That's so therapeutic. Thank you, Dr. Freeman.
Thank you, counselor.
So I'd like to thank Dr. Foster, too, for having us, and we thank her for offering this through Purview Center for Teaching and Learning. And so I thank her also for allowing me to present my book and my research. I also like to thank my series editor for encouraging me, Dr. Gail Cannella of Myers Education Press, and my publisher of Myers Education Press, Chris Myers, and his team. My wife getting lost for most of the day grabbed my attention. 2 or 3 times a week she visited her elderly father, who lived about 20 miles away from us. She left her house mid-morning and by 3 p.m. Had not returned. This was not uncommon, but a little after 2:30, she told me she was on her way home, but was in traffic. I remember thinking that I wish she had left earlier, because in Houston, traffic starts jamming up around 3 p.m., if not earlier. At 6 p.m., I called her again, but she did not pick up. I called her dad, and he informed me that my wife had left some time ago. I asked her son and then our daughter if they heard from their mother, and both said that she was at their grandparents' house. I asked them to try to reach her on her cell phone. 7 o'clock passed. Both our children informed me they could not reach their mother, and said they would call others and keep trying to reach her. I tried to brush concern aside and told them she probably stopped to shop. Our son quipped aloud that his mom did not like to shop unless one of them needed something. I had thoughts about that statement, but I left it alone. Plus, I could tell our son was starting to worry, too. I obsessively called her phone and tried not to panic. I began planning where I would start looking for her and how to ask our children to help me without causing them to panic like I was starting to. A little after 8 o'clock, my wife came through our back door and was visibly shaken. I asked her why she did not answer her phone, and she told me she'd gotten lost. This was alarming to me because my wife had always navigated Houston with ease. I hugged her to calm her down and asked what happened, which she struggled to remember. This occurrence triggered a series of doctor visits that pointed us to an unwelcome diagnosis for my wife and changed our lives forever. My book, reflecting on autoethnographic and phenomenological experiences, a caregiver's journey, is a story about my spiritual purpose in life. This human story has the proclivity to be depressing and is sad, but it does not have to be. Carolyn Ellis, one of the preeminent scholars in autoethnography, tells us that autoethnography should be provocative and knock us off our feet. Through my faith, I choose to find opportunities to care for my wife in positive ways. Primarily, I focus on how my care benefits my wife. Though the care is hard, requiring me to be in perpetual motion and constantly exerting energy, the opportunity to give care is a gift. My major concern is about my wife's suffering. My story is about positive caregiving to my wife of more than 40 years. It is a personal story that has emotional triggers. My wife's life season is called frontotemporal dementia. It is a cognitive disease that can affect a person as early as 30 years old and has affected people younger. My wife was diagnosed when she was 53 years old. Specifically, her most current CT scan indicates she is experiencing severe advanced dementia. Although the diagnosis seems to be redundant, the use of the two superlatives signifying the grievousness of her condition, I, along with our loved ones, suffer double grieving because of the loss of her mind and her body to dementia. My constant prayer is that I am granted time to care for her for the rest of her life. I take nothing for granted now and enjoy every moment we have left together because neither of us are promised time. Her presence is precious to me. We have been best friends since high school, spanning multiple decades. I am confident that without my care, my wife would die. The thought of this vulnerability breaks my heart because I wish it were not our story. Even though I choose to work full-time and arrange for care when I'm not at home, caregiving permeates my life. Several broad lenses were applied to the unfolding of this book. These represent interpretive beliefs I hold in my academic and personal lived experiences and are constantly evolving. They all reflect social behavioral engagements and observations. These lenses reflect contextual glimpse of my position in autoethnography and phenomenology, focusing on caregiving. More specifically, my caregiving autoethnography is my collective written story that is entrenched in my memory and journals that occurs in the presence of my wife. In this form, meaning and sense are explored. The prefix auto refers to me or myself. Ethno refers to my ethos and insider status as husband. The root ethno refers to culture and is complex interpretive grounding that intersects not only with the self and the written, but also broadly with the cultural components of shared values, practices, social norms, and worldviews associated with a particular cultural group. In novel fashion, my worldview lens has shifted to accommodate my real my new real ontological perspective in the context of ongoing and cumulative experiences. Peeling back other layers of my cultural group components, racial discrimination, elements of faith, race, ethnical, gender, black, middle class status, caregiving, and baby boomer status are revealed. And under each of these components, multiple sub-elements reveal deeper insights and quandaries. Graphy refers to my writing about me and my experiences that form my narrative. Hence, autoethnography represents expressions in a broad cultural latent context during specific periods that include my biography and autobiography within my life story. The narrative of my book emerged from the infusion of one substantive approach, phenomenology, into the overarching substantive approach of autoethnography and compelled me to consider the impact of each. The autoethnography approach is itself a complex mixture of approaches that represent legitimate bodies of research. The merged approaches are exploratory in nature. In this mixed method approach, phenomenological elements focus more on introspection, consciousness than on the other main character, my wife. Methodological overlapping concepts include reflective, descriptive, interpretive, and engaging endeavors. Self-analysis and heart-searching seek a deeper spiritual understanding rather than a day-to-day temporal existence. While temporal tasks such as constantly cooking, cleaning, bathing, and etc. are important, at the deeper level, there is meaning to the whole lived experience. A question that arises is, what does this phenomenon of husband caregiving mean in autoethnography as participant and researcher? This I discuss in greater detail in my book. The essence of the meaning is based on subjective reflections. The frame of autoethnography supports the emergence of multiple personal caregiving perspectives that were explored through the use of life story narrative, autoethnography, and autobiography. In the life story autobiographies, the subject and author's reflections on journaling reflect value in caregiving. The autoethnography perspective is one in which the primary subject provides self-reflection to meanings in the family milieu. The analysis strategy of constant comparison and grounded theory research, while not an approach in this work, is used for reflection and observation and provides further autoethnographic introspection. The consciousness seeks to explore the meaning of a phenomenon revealed within the context of a particular setting. Reflective journals and observations seek to understand if and how shared experiences transcend multiple contexts. This inquiry further seeks to objectively distinguish what is expressed, expected, and what is not expressed. Subjectively, the inquiry seeks introspective connections between reflection and life experiences. In closing, I always find myself being hypervigilant in caring for my wife, looking for any pain or need she might have, as she is now nonverbal. Over time, however, I have evolved to a less urgent stance. I have realized that I pass on my feelings of urgency or calmness to my wife. I realize much of my issue with this is my sense that I need to finish dressing, grooming, cooking, and transfer this sense of urgency to my wife, which causes her to feel rushed and stressed. I often remind myself to pace feeding my wife so that she has time to chew her food. I understand that this part is because there is always something else to do after I finish the task at hand. As I was completing this book, I was watching my wife because she was moving her body and seemed to be trying to say something I did not understand. I could see her excitement in her eyes, and she began to move her body from side to side in a kind of swaying form. I did not know what or how to interpret her behavior, as I did not remember seeing it before. I could not detect that she was in pain, but was looking for what was bothering her. Alexa was playing a soulful tune on a familiar in a familiar refrain that I finally recognized she was singing and dancing to. These are moments I hold dear and look forward to moments like these in our future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don. We have lots of questions and comments, but we'll do that right after this commercial.
Okay.
That was- Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon For our PV published authors from the Whitlow R. Green College of Education, for those of you just joining, I spoke first on my published book, Safe Spaces. Dr. Collins was, the reflection on autoethnographic and phenomenological experiences, a caregiver's journey. Wow, what an experience. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman.
That this is going to be a blessing to a lot of caregivers
Thank you.
to understand the journey, but to understand it from an educational perspective. Qualitative research. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Dr. Anthony Harris, my awesome department head.
Our department.
Okay, I'll let him be yours too.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. And I'm feeling really honored to be sandwiched in between two of my colleagues from the Department of Educational Leadership and Counseling. And Dr. Thomas, even though she's not in my department, we're all in the same college. I want to acknowledge the others who are here today, Lady Booker and Dr. Butler, and newly minted Dr. Jamila Clayton back there, who just defended her dissertation at Sam Houston State University. The book I want to talk about is, grammatically it's not correct, but spiritually it hits the nail. It's called Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around.
All right.
Now, for those of you who don't know the history of that phrase, it's from a freedom song, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around, which is based in spiritual singing. So today, it's a coming-of-age story. It's my view of the civil rights movement in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's not a history book of the civil rights movement, but it's how this child, this growing into teenage years and adolescence and adulthood, how I saw the civil rights movement in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And on the front cover is a very interesting picture. Most people don't know anybody on this picture. I'll just tell you, and if you get a chance to get the book, I'll tell you who it is. The guy in the center is me. This is 1964. That little kid in the middle was. And to my left is a friend of mine, Ratio Jones, who is deceased now. And the gentleman on the far left here is a guy by the name of Pete Seeger. Some of our younger people may not have any idea who Pete Seeger was, but Pete Seeger was a world-renowned folk singer. And he was in Mississippi in 1964 to be a part of Freedom Summer, which was about freedom schools and voter registration and getting the Freedom Democratic Party off to a good start. So some years ago, I started writing this book. It's been a work of labor. It's sort of like a memoir, but like most memoirs, it needs to be updated, and I plan to update it. But this starts at a particular time and ends at another particular time. But I want to share two stories from this book that honors two very important people in my life. First is my mother, Daisy Harris. And I'm going to share a story about her that's in this book. She was an icon in the civil rights movement in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. She passed away about 8 years ago, and every time I have an opportunity to talk about the civil rights movement, I have to acknowledge her. I have to say thank you as a mother, as a warrior, as somebody who cared about social justice even before it was in vogue to care about social justice. And literally, obviously, if it were not for her, I wouldn't be here, but the values that were instilled in me as a child came from my mother. And as an activist, is something that I have clung to so many years. Anytime I began to get tired or my commitment to social justice maybe waned just slightly, I think about Daisy Harris. And I think about what was she doing. So let me tell you one of the stories about her. And I'll give you a little background, a little context of this story. This was about 1964, 1965. Black people could not register to vote in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and indeed across much of the South. And the way to protest that is that adults went out on picket lines and demonstrations and marches and so forth, and they protested the fact that my parents, because of the color of their skin, could not register to vote. So what I call the pro-civil rights forces and the anti-civil rights forces, they played this intriguing chess match So the anti-civil rights forces said, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to put all of these adults in jail. We're going to put them in prison. And there won't be anybody to demonstrate, march, or be on a picket line. And before long, this fledgling civil rights movement will slowly die off, and the news media will go away, and there won't be anything left to the civil rights movement. That was what the anti-civil rights forces did. The pro-civil rights forces said, okay, if you're going to put the adults in jail, we're going to put children out there on these picket lines and demonstrations. We dare you to treat these children the way you treated these adults. And you've seen the videos of the police dogs, the billy clubs, the fire hoses. So they said, we dare you to treat them this way. So the anti-civil rights forces said, okay, what we're going to do, we're going to pass a city ordinance that says that no one under the age of 18 can be on a picket line or demonstrate or be on a march. So in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, the city council and the mayor got together and they passed a city ordinance that said no one under the age of 18 can be on a picket line. Well, this cold, wet January morning, Anthony Harris, my friend Ratio, and my older brother James, we show up at this picket line. My mother dropped us off at the courthouse, and she went to take my dad to work. And, I mean, crazy things happened between the time she dropped us off and came back. Because as we were marching around the courthouse in Forest County, Hattiesburg, Mississippi, we had these signs around our necks, these ubiquitous signs that said, "Let my people go." Freedom is for everybody. Some phrases like that, you know, nothing to provoke anybody. And we were not blocking the sidewalk or anything. We were just marching peacefully up and down the Main Street side of the sidewalk. These police officers passed by, and you could hear the tires screeching because they did a U-turn. They pulled up the curb where we were. They jumped out of their car, rushed over to where we were, tore the signs off our necks, and literally threw the three of us in the back of the squad car.
Wow.
Now, there was a famous guy with SNCC by the name of Lawrence Guillot. And if you've never heard of Mr. Guillot, Google him sometime. He was there. And he came over to the back of the squad car. The window was down. He said, "Boys, don't worry. Everything's going to be okay." On one level, those are very comforting words. But I knew it was not up to Mr. Guillot as to whether or not we would be okay. It was up to these two police officers. And that message came through loud and clearly when the officer in the passenger side, he picked up his two-way radio and he said, "Headquarters, have the dogs been fed today?"
Wow.
They haven't? Well, we're bringing fresh meat in for them. I mean, for a moment, I was like feeling safe because I was in the middle. My brother's on one side and my friend Ratio on the others. I felt protected. I felt like if anybody gets it first, be one of them, and I'll be okay, right? So they got us to the police station, and I'm shaking. I'm shivering from the cold and from the fear. As we walked in that police station, there's only one thing on my mind, and you can guess what that was. I'm listening for the sound of barking dogs. I want to know where the dogs are so I can know how to exit if I need to. They took us into this interrogation room, and there were chairs in this room, but we could not sit in those chairs. Instead, we had to sit on this cold, wet cement floor with our backs pressed up against this cold, wet cement wall. And this officer, he kept trying to intimidate us. He tried his very best. And in my case, he was succeeding because I knew what kind of dogs they were talking about. They were not Chihuahuas or, dogs like that. These were attack German Shepherd dogs. And he pulled out of his back pocket something called a blackjack. And if you don't know what a blackjack is, it's a weapon that the police use. It's a piece of lead wrapped in black leather. And he approached us in a very menacing way, flipping it from hand to hand. And he said, "Boys, you know what we do with this, don't you?" And we said, "Yes, sir." And I'm going to say exactly what my ears heard, and I hope I do not insult anybody's sensibilities when I say this, because I want you to get the full effect of what this man told us. He said, "Yes, this is what we used to beat niggers' asses with." And I thought, oh my God, we managed to not get eaten by the dogs. Now they're going to beat us to death in here. By this time, this door to this interrogation room opens up, bam! In rushes this petite black woman yelling, "Let these kids go. I said you let them go right now. You have no right to hold them here. Let them go now." That was my mom. That was Daisy Harris coming to the rescue. I have never been happier to see my mom as I was when she walked through that door. And what I tell people about her, she didn't knock on the door. She didn't even ask for permission to enter this room. Her attitude was, do what you want to do with me. But there are two of my babies in there, and a mother will do anything to protect her babies. So she was motivated to come in there because she knew an injustice was occurring, and she knew two of her kids were at risk. And I use her as an example sometimes of when I lose courage. I think about what could have happened to her. She could have been beaten, she could have been arrested, or even worse. But she said, do what you need to do to me, but you let these kids go. And people say, what happened next? I said, these officers responded to her the same way we did when she raised her voice. You better do what this lady says. So they let us go. But the lesson for this is that the sacrifice that she made, how she made the safety and security of these three young boys who were unjustly incarcerated here, that was her priority. In some ways, it reminds you of the Good Samaritan who saw the priest and Levite walk past the man in the ditch, right? And they said, let's not go over there because we may get robbed, we may get hurt. And they were worried about themselves. My mom was like, the Levite, the Samaritan said, if I don't go over there, what's going to happen to him? And my mom's attitude, if I don't go in there, what's going to happen to these boys? So I use her as an example of courage, of determination, and she's a source of inspiration. We've lost her, as I said, but I think about her all the time, and she is just somebody very precious. In fact, I wrote a book about her called Freedom, Family, Faith, and there was another F in there, I can't think of it, The Legacy of Daisy Harris, and she was a wonderful person. The second story, as the person that I want to honor today, as you probably know, today is the fifth anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King. He was killed April 4th, 1968. I was 15 years old at the time. And I had desegregated an all-white junior high school in 1966. And as you can imagine what junior high school is like, kids can be pretty awful. And then when you lay a race onto it, it becomes even more so. That he was Thursday, April 4th was when he was assassinated. Friday, April 5th, I go back to school. I'm in this room full of white kids. I'm the only black kid in the classroom. And my white classmates are celebrating the death of Dr. King. They are whooping it up. Hey, Wick, how'd you get from Memphis so quick? Chuck, nice shot. The king is dead. And they're saying it loud enough for me to hear it. And I'm going through all of these emotions. As you can imagine, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm hurt. I want to just go up and just hit somebody, but I know that was not what I should do. And as I was sitting there, I just can't let them see how upset I was. And then my mind went back to a few weeks earlier when Dr. King came to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, March 17th, 1968. He was scheduled to be at Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church at 6:30 that evening. The place was packed. The balcony was packed. They brought out these folding chairs and put them in the aisles. All of those were filled. 6:30, Dr. King is not there. 7 o'clock, 7:30, he's still not there. People began to wonder, is he going to be okay? And because we were just south of a place called Laurel, Mississippi, which was the headquarters of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And they would have been happy to have Dr. King as a trophy. So around midnight, Dr. King showed up. And that church was as packed at midnight as it was at 6:30 that evening. And what I liked about what Dr. King did, he could have very easily said, I'm just going to go back to the hotel and go to sleep. It's too late. I'll just send my apologies and not show up. But I remember he was there. He showed up. And I remember just being so mesmerized by his presence and his oratory and the message that he delivered to us. And being in that presence of this great man. Obviously, we didn't know a few weeks later he would be assassinated. But it was an honor. It was an opportunity that I will always cherish, that I was there listening to Martin Luther King with my own ears and seeing him with my own eyes. And it's something that it's been a source of inspiration for me for a long, long time. And we left that church, Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, in the wee hours of the morning. And I left just feeling so much more encouraged and fortified in my conviction that even as a 15-year-old, I knew what I was doing was what Dr. King would want us to do. He talked about it all the time, that freedom isn't free. We have to continue to make sacrifices. We have to continue to know that the struggle continues. And we can see that so evident today, that we cannot give up the struggle. We cannot become complacent. We cannot afford to say voting is not important. We cannot afford to say that this doesn't bother me, it doesn't affect me. There's no difference in these candidates. And I'll just get off my soapbox here a little bit, but you know, when I think about when people say don't vote, I think about what happened with me when I went into that interrogation room, scared to death that I was going to be eaten by police dogs, scared to death that I was going to get beaten by this police officer. And I think about Vernon Damer. I think about the 3 civil rights workers in Philadelphia, Mississippi in '64, who gave their lives so that you could vote. And for anybody who says, I don't care about voting, I don't want to vote, it's not going to make any difference, I say shame on you. Shame on you for dishonoring the legacy and the memory of those who came before us, who paved the way for us to exercise our right to vote. And this election that's coming up in 2024, folks, you got to be ready. You got to vote. Don't leave it up to somebody else. Okay, I'll stop preaching now.
Oh, no, that's okay. Now I realize why I had on army fatigues back in the 60s. Okay, so right now, thank you for joining us. We're going to take another short commercial break.
Oh, Dr. Harris.
Wow, yeah. We'll have welcome back. Again, thank you for joining us. For those who have missed the first part, you have missed some awesome stories, some awesome education, some awesome sense of courage and faith. We left with Dr. Harris sharing with, ain't nobody gonna turn me around. And you know, listening to these stories from my younger brothers, one of the things I see is that they have not allowed challenges, strategies, intimidation, words stop their spirit of being strong, of being courageous, of still being loving, and still being helping professionals.
Amen.
So I would say get these books, because at a time where we are in America today, we need to look back, remember from whence we came, so we will know how we're going to get into the future.
Amen.
Okay, next, I'm excited about this young lady. She's one of our new faculty in the curriculum and instruction department, Dr. Katina Thomas. Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Dr. Freeman. First off, thank you for saying young lady.
You are a baby.
And second of all, I'd like to say that I appreciate this opportunity by the institution for being able to have this platform, the Center for Teaching Excellence, and I am proud to be sitting amongst what I like to call very seasoned colleagues that have very many stories.
That's a perfect
tell.
adjective.
What I am going to do is shift a little bit. I have a story to tell as well, except mine will be a little different. Mine is a book that is actually under development that is supportive of teacher candidates and new teachers. And the reason why I started developing this was because about 10 years ago, when I was working with a teacher candidate in the field, she was a student teacher. We were having a post-discussion after I evaluated her teaching. And she was very good. She was a shrewd teacher. She had an impeccable lesson plan, very easy to follow. But there was something that was just a little off, a little bit of a piece missing. And while we were discussing, I just asked her this simple question. Do you see yourself as an adult or as a grown-up in this classroom while teaching these students? And then she stopped. And she said, well, no, I don't. And that really turned on a light bulb for me and shifted my vision. And I've been coaching and mentoring pre-service teachers, teacher candidates, in-service teachers for very many years. And what I started to notice was that many of them felt prepared when they were under our care. But once they received their degree and we wished them well, and they started transitioning into this grown-up role of a first-year teacher, all of these emotions and struggles and misconceptions were occurring. So what I started doing was developing in my coaching and mentoring foundational tips to help that transition. Because once they leave our care, like they're leaving the nest, they are going to be treated as a fully employed teacher, regardless of their age, their years of experience, and that sometimes they need an anchor, they need a check-in, they need a foundation, they need something that's going to assist them in making that smooth transition to prevent them from leaving the field altogether, from facing certain obstacles that they were facing that were preventable if they had someone there, they had someone there that would assist them in this transition. So the language and the style of writing that I'm using is very practical, because when educators go into the field, they want something very quickly they can pick up, they can read, that's a little far removed from a textbook. that's a resource they can read and say, okay, I can think about how I can apply this very quickly. But it would pour into them in helping them build relationships and setting a routine and being able to help their students as well as grow as they move through the profession. So I have 7 tips, but I only want to talk about 2 or 3 because I want people to really be invested in what they're going to be looking at. And I also want to say, before I talk about these 2 or 3 tips, that I appreciate launching this here at Prairie View because this is full circle for me. I am a graduate of Prairie View of this exact same teacher education program. So to be able to come back to introduce this here, to pour into the students here, and to possibly have a resource that's not only good for them, but for all new teachers as well as any administrators that needed this to help with their new teacher institutes, that this would be something that would equip them. So one of the tips that I mentioned is know that your content as a new teacher outweighs winning best decorated classroom. Something very practical. Many times as a new teacher, you go in and you look at all of these things on Pinterest. You look at a lot of things that are online and you say, that's cute, that looks really nice. And then you go overboard with your classroom. I was guilty of that as well. But one thing that was neglected was studying the content to make sure you're teaching meaningful information to your students that's developmentally appropriate. And what many new teachers don't realize is that when an administrator or someone more seasoned walks into the room, we can actually look at your room to see how much content is focused on and how much background knowledge you have. So what I'm encouraging is that they keep in mind to study their content first, to know what to teach, and then worry about your classroom design. A second tip that I also recommend is to communicate with your administrators. They don't bite. Even though you hear a lot of horror stories of what less supportive administrators may do, they're out there. Those stories are always going to be out there. But I still encourage them to talk to your administrator. Most likely this was the person that hired you. So there was some chemistry or relationship there where you should feel comfortable enough to go to them, to ask them for assistance, to check in with them without feeling as though they are the enemy or someone that's looking to catch you. And a third tip that I also mentioned is to join a professional organization or a union. That's something that's not focused on a lot necessarily in a course, but it's something that's encouraged for professional growth. This is another source of support where you can build your network, study more about the literature that is out there, to be able to attend conferences, and to spend the money on your union and professional dues. To do that from the very beginning and get active and stay connected so that you know what's going on in education, whether you seek a graduate degree or not, to know what's going on. So in conclusion, I wanted this because coaching and mentoring of teachers is something that I enjoy. It feels as though this is something I'm called to do. It seems like every environment that I go into, I find myself leaving nuggets that aren't in a textbook for these students. And I want to have one particular resource that will help them along the way so they can feel as though they have a strong enough foundation to grow, to succeed, and to turn around and mentor someone else.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. You know, I wish that book had been around 51 years ago when I walked into my first classroom. After 1 week, I was in the superintendent's office crying, quitting and saying, my mom and daddy have wasted all this money, 4 years, and I can't do it. But he did link me with a mentor, some seasoned teachers, educators, and I remained in the profession all these many years later. But I think that is going to be a valuable asset for new teachers. They need to know that. So thank you. In fact, I'll buy that for my daughter. This is her first year and she could still use it.
And I will autograph it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. right now, we're going to a commercial, and while we're on commercial, don't forget to write your questions down if you have questions for us. Thank you. Welcome back. And again, thank you for joining us. I applaud my colleagues, their stories they've shared, information on their books. And so if you have comments or questions, please write those. We had one question to come in, and the individual asked, why is it important for black students to read these books? Well, I'll go first if you don't mind. Not just black students, white students, Hispanic students, Asian students should read these books. Because I think what this does is it not only teaches us about growing, but how to control ourselves. It teaches us history. But this particular book, Safe Spaces, it will help individuals to find that space. Sometimes we react rather than respond to situations. As we mature in life, we need to learn how to respond. Reaction is it's temporary, it's action, it's out of emotions, it's not out of thinking. And so when you have found your safe space, then it can help you with situations that may be challenging to you. It may be classroom, it may be tests, it may be family, it may be friends, it could be relationships. This Safe Spaces for any individual will help you to be a stronger individual, a more calm individual, more in tune to yourself, and to thine own self be true. And you need to know yourself before you can know others. Why should anybody read Ain't Nobody Gonna Turn Me Around?
There's so many reasons to read this book. One of them is the title itself. It can be a mantra you recite to yourself every day. And you can say it as the author wrote it of the song, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. Or if you want to be grammatically correct, you say, nobody is going to stop me from doing what I need to do.
Right.
Either way, the message is the same, is that it speaks to your courage and your determination and your desire to move forward, that despite the obstacles, despite those roadblocks, despite people out there who are intentionally putting roadblocks in front of you, you're not going to let them turn you around. You're not going to let them stop you. And if they try to stop you, you find a way to get around it, because there are so many things going on in our country today that we have to constantly remind ourselves and be vigilant about the forces that are trying to keep us from, that want us to turn around. And we just can't let that go. The second reason I think it's important, because it tells the story from my personal point of view. I'm part of a cohort of people who are still here, who remember the Civil Rights Movement. The generation older than I am, my mother and others, they passed on. There's a generation younger than I am. They didn't have that experience. And as you know, what's going on in our libraries and schools and so forth, they're banning books. They don't want some people to know about what really happened. And this is from my lens, from my perspective. Somebody else will write another book and it'll be different from mine, which it ought to be. But I want it to be a lesson, a reflection on what actually went on from somebody who was there, not from somebody who heard from somebody. One of the things that I always resented, my mother was just an encyclopedia of events that happened in Hattiesburg. And it became popular at one point for PhD students and others from other parts of the country would come and they would want to interview her and pick her brain and then write a book and write a dissertation. And I said, they shouldn't do that. You have your own story to tell. You should tell your story yourself and not let people tell it for you, because they can't tell it the way you can tell it. And after she passed away, she entrusted me with writing her story, and I tried to be as faithful to her life as I possibly could. So it's while it's retrospective and looking back in my life, I hope it's also an opportunity for somebody to say, this is inspirational, motivational, to move forward, to not let anything stand in your way. Because let me tell you, growing up as a black kid in Mississippi was not a bed of roses. I mean, there's some stories in this book. I just shared 2 of them with you today, but there's some very chilling stories, and not to put anybody on a guilt trip, not to put anybody in any other emotion, but other than say, I am determined to make sure this mess doesn't happen again. So that's where I think our students need to know about these stories. They need to know their history. You said it earlier, if you don't know from whence you come, you don't know where you're going. And there are people who don't want you to know where you came from. They don't want you to know your history. So don't give in to that.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Dr. Collins, even if they don't have a family member that's a caregiver, but if they plan on doing any type of graduate work, you need to know about qualitative research, Dr. Collins.
Right. And we all have experiences or phenomena in our lives that we can write about or tell a story about. This particular story is a very personal story, but we all have those stories. I also want to point out, because one of the issues that was brought up in the question is, why should black students be interested in this? One of the issues in dementia is that black people are not reflected in the data. And there are multiple reasons for that, but the major reason is that researchers are not going to the black community. Many people who experience dementia, their families choose not to place them in, for example, a nursing home. Not that there's anything wrong with nursing homes. There are some good ones, and of course there are some that are not so good. But researchers don't go into families. They go to nursing homes, where our people, our loved ones don't necessarily reside. And so it's important to understand that, and as we become researchers, we need to know that we need to go into the communities and collect that data so that it's represented.
Thank you. You know, Dr. Collins, I was a caregiver for my mother for a while. My daughter, who's named after her, Lucille, was actually born 2 weeks following my mother's stroke, which left her paralyzed and aphasia. So we had her through a tube and change her. And it was during that time that I was compelled, that I realized that I was a divorced woman with 3 children and an invalid mother. I had to make some decisions, and that story is shared in my book, Safe Spaces, where I decided to go back and earn a doctoral degree. So challenges. So when you ask why should black students, because there's some mothers out there, there's some single parents out there that may be at a crossroad and you don't know which way to go. Safe Spaces will help that. But even as a caregiver, to understand and hear the plight of others who have gone through that journey, it can encourage you, it can help you, it could just sustain you for the walk. And Dr. Thomas, I've already shared that I wished I had the book, but
but I do want to address about how it can benefit black students. I've been on very many panels, podcasts where we've talked about teaching while black, because we have a generation of students that are very aware of themselves culturally right now. So now when they take stock of anything, they always think about, well, how can I use this information to be successful in my skin, in this world, in this system? So I appreciate this question. We have a lot of discussion about that. And I believe the information that I'm conveying, because it is written from my walk as teaching while black, coaching and mentoring while black, where culture and cultural relevance is always in the back of my mind when I'm thinking about how can this support you, that this information will support them and include that walk of how can I actually use this and navigate as a black American or a black person, or if I identify as black, in the profession and be successful.
okay. Thank you. Do we have more questions or comments? So, our next question is, would you like to read that, Dr. Collins?
Sure. How you balance your research interests with your publications and teaching at peer review? How do you balance, if it could come back up, how do you balance your research interest with your publications and teaching at peer review? It is a balancing job. It is something that we learn to do every day. It does take time. I'm thinking about Dr. Thomas's book and what the research tells us about how long it takes for a teacher to be acclimated to their curriculum. It takes at least 5 years. Unfortunately, too many teachers leave the profession at 5 years, if not before. And so it is a process. We have to learn how to balance our personal lives with our professional lives to the point that we are successful. And that's something that we strive for every day.
I'd like to piggyback off of that, Dr. Collins. I support every word that you just said, but I also want to add the power of the word no. Something that's simple. Setting those boundaries to know and know yourself enough to know when you're going to be overextended. That the power of no does not mean that it's going to be the end of your journey. That there are some things you can pick up and do now. And there's some things that you may have to work or focus on later. But to trust yourself to know that the later will be there. That I don't have to do everything at one time to be able to balance and be able to finish that journey. That it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I think that's excellent advice. It's a juggling act. And to the next, from 1 year to the next. If you happen to be going up for tenure or for promotion, research and some of these other things are going to take priority because you need to produce, you need to get those articles out there. I encourage people when you get to a point where you are secure in your profession and you're secure in your future, maybe that's when you get tenure and you can think about doing some other things. I encourage people to write outside of their discipline. Write some things that have nothing to do with what you do for a living. That's hard. It may sound kind of counterintuitive, but because what you know is what you do most of the time, but there's some other things that you know and some other stories that you have that can make a difference. And that's one of the joys I experience in my writings. I've published 14 books, and most of them, many of them are novels or nonfiction or fiction. And so I would just say write. Yes.
So I could piggyback off of what Dr. Harris has said. I started 2 textbooks, one on women in administration and then just leadership. And I have the chapters. I have the chapters listed. I've even written a couple of the chapters. But I couldn't finish that because this safe spaces was on my heart. And it's like the good Lord said that, and it's like, now I educated you, I helped you to get these degrees, and you're going to put me on the back burner for a textbook? So like Dr. Harris said, my passion, my love had to come first. And my passion was with the good Lord, and I had to follow this. And one of the things I did as a young professor those many years ago was I set a day aside, some time aside, and I didn't answer phones. I didn't contact anybody. Those were my hours to write. And as a younger professor, it used to be like late at night, like between 10 and 1. But as time has come along, that time shifted because the eyes don't even want to stay open after 10 o'clock. So I had to start doing that during the day. As everyone has said, you have to set the priorities. You have to say no, but you have to allocate the time for your research, and it has to be something you like. It has to be a passion, and that's what I tell all my doc students. If you don't have a passion for the dissertation or the problem you're about to solve, leave it alone. Because it'll get old, you'll get tired, you will not like it. So as Dr. Harris has said, start with something that you like, even if it's writing poetry, if it's short stories. My daughter always told me, Mama, you tell, and my sons, Mama, you tell real good stories, because I used to make up stories when they were babies. And I didn't realize that I was getting myself ready to tell this story. And so what I realized for my research interest, I even had the title for my Women in Leadership book. I already had the title and everything. But what I've realized is that not only do I want to give them the theory and the understanding, but I needed some stories I had to experience so that it will be more meaningful to them. Amen. Because if you know the different ways individuals' epistemology and their axiology. Axiology, what do we value? Epistemology, how do we learn? You've got to know those things. And one thing I've done with this experience is understood the different ethnic groups and what we value and what we learn. And those of us coming from the Hispanic American and African American or Black Americans, we are relational. We like movement. I know that. We like stories, but don't just sit here like this and teach me and tell me a story. Put some movement with it. So one of the things you have to know is the audience you're writing to and what they expect. Commercial time. More questions? Wrap up. Okay. One of these days I'm going to learn how to read lips. So we're about to close up. And we have Miss Wiggins, Shayla Wiggins, that's going to share with us now. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Let me say thank you to Dr. Collins, Dr. Thomas, Dr. Harris, and Dr. Barber-Freeman. You all are definitely 4 of the many reasons why this hill is legendary, and we thank you for sharing your wisdom and your stories with us today. We thank you for your inspiration today, because you all have shown us exactly just a snippet of what our students get when they come here and when they're in our classes. So thank you very much. You've inspired all of us in the room. We have an in-studio audience, and our online audience, so we thank you again. We thank those of you who've joined us online, as well as those of you who have joined us in the studio today. We are extremely appreciative of your time because we know it is indeed valuable, so thank you to you all. We have a few announcements. In the center, we have started this series of PV published authors to do exactly what we did here today, which is showcase all of the talent that lies in our faculty, our staff, and our students. And we hope that you've been inspired today to write, to think, to join us in person or virtually as we go through this series. Please note that our third in this series, our third workshop, our third book review will take place at the end of this month in April, on April 25th. We will feature authors at that event from the College of Arts and Sciences, so that will be very exciting. We ask you to come back. We'll send out emails as usual to alert you to the date. Well, you know the date, but the time and the place, so that you can join us online or in person. We also have an evaluation that we will share with you in the comments. It's already been posted. We will also send that out as an email. And last but certainly not least, we have a book series that's coming up, that's being edited by our own Dr. Don Collins and Dr. Lorette Foster here from Prairie View through the HBCU Faculty Development Network. In just a few moments, you'll see a flyer on your screen, and we will also share that via email. We ask you, if you are an aspiring author and you have a book idea that's germane to the HBCU ecosystem, we want you to submit your work. And there is more information that's on the flyer. We thank you again for joining us. We ask you to reach out and keep in contact with us via email and on our website, as well as here on campus. Drop by. We're in 202 Delco. Once again, let's give our authors a hearty round of applause today. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you very much for being here. We also want to extend a hearty thank you to the soon-to-be Dr. Teresa Dowell-Vest and her wonderful students for accommodating us today and reaching out and inviting us to be live here in the studio. And with that being said, we are going to have lunch. Those of us who are here in person, we have lunch waiting for us. We're going to fellowship a while and talk a little bit more and share a bit more. So to those of you who are online, thank you for joining us. Have an amazing day today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next event.
Thank you.